Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Who would like to begin with the first question?
Mr. Branden, you have stated that psychological symptoms often serve the purpose of increasing one's sense of control. Would you please elaborate on this?
Well, let me go back to a very important theoretical issue I touched briefly on in the Psychology of Self-Esteem. In my chapter on the psychology of emotions, I discussed the fact that there are two sets of axiomatic values at the base of all preference. On the physical level, the value of pleasure and the disvalue of pain, and on the psychological level, the value of a sense of efficacy or a sense of control, and the disvalue of a helplessness or impotence. The need of self-esteem, which is the central theme, of course, of that book, elaborates the more detailed nature of man's need to experience a sense of his own competence to live, his personal efficacy. At the time I wrote the Psychology of Self-Esteem, I was aware of the fact that many neurotic symptoms had in effect a purpose. They were subconsciously designed to reduce feelings of helplessness or impotence and or to enhance or preserve feelings of efficacy or control or the illusion of such feelings. Today, I would carry that thesis much farther than I saw clearly to doing when I wrote the book. Today, I have become convinced that virtually all neurotic symptoms, without exception, can be understood in terms of an effort to enhance or preserve or protect an individual's sense of efficacy or control. Let's take some simple examples. One of the most obvious is emotional repression. If a person is afraid of certain emotions, afraid they will overwhelm him, afraid that they are not tolerable, and represses them, he does so very clearly in order to, as he sees it, remain in control, to remain functional, to remain apart from forces within him which he feels would be threatening to his continued effective functioning. Now, this problem may have begun in childhood in terms of repressing traumas which he didn't know how to assimilate, but the fact remains that the particular solution he chooses, namely repression, is serving the intended goal, or rather is aimed at serving the intended goal of permitting him to remain functional. Now, let's take an example of an altogether different kind. A person might come into therapy complaining of great feelings of procrastination, indecisiveness. Now, there are two different ways we can look at this problem. We can look at it in the way that most conventional psychologists do, in terms of investigating so-called historical causes, as though something in the past caused this to happen. That's not, however, the way I look at symptoms. I look at symptoms from the point of view of what purpose do they accomplish. And I designed a number of different methods and techniques which bring out very, very clearly the fact that such symptoms are actually serving the purpose of keeping the person in a state where he doesn't have to be responsible for his own existence, or he feels he doesn't have to be. He's not obliged to face challenges. He's not obliged to take risks. His passivity keeps him out of the way of all that. And in so doing, he doesn't have to go up against the risk of a strong shock to his feelings of efficacy or effectiveness or control should he commit himself to certain goals and then be defeated. And we can establish this very, very clearly. We can establish this even with such things as neurotically caused headaches, or psychologically caused headaches, I should perhaps say. They are serving a purpose. They are doing something for the person. They aren't something which merely happens. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all conscious or conniving, or that the symptoms are a super elaborate form of malingering. They're real, all right, But my point is that I believe I can prove that virtually every kind of neurotic symptom which is psychologically caused represents a given individual's solution, shall we say, to the problem of dealing with some experienced threat to his sense of efficacy or control. That's a very radical thesis. I consider it the most important discovery, if I can prove it, and I believe I can, that I have made in my life. But I am convinced that I can prove it, and I propose to give a very detailed presentation of this in a future work. This being the case, we have to understand neurotic symptoms in the following way. At points of a person's life, he is up against painful emotions or shocks or traumas or experiences which, for one reason or another, he experiences as threatening to his sense of control or his sense of efficacy. Now, there are many ways of moving forward from that point. He could work his way through the problem if he has enough knowledge. There's no one particular solution which it's guaranteed a given individual will take. But my point is that neurotic symptoms represent, in effect, the organism's solutions to problems posed by some kind of threat to the organism's effective functioning. It represents a solution, only it's an unfortunate solution, it's a harmful solution. We then categorize all of the different means by which an individual tries to attain or preserve or protect the sense of efficacy and control into constructive and life-serving solutions or destructive or life-negating solutions. But every individual has that need to feel efficacious. He has that need to feel in control. That need will be challenged many times in his life, and different kinds of solutions will be arrived at by different people. For example, one person will seek a sense of efficacy and control through the continual expansion of his powers, of his intellectual growth, which is, of course, a healthy solution. Somebody else will radically circumscribe his environment, his field of action, perhaps seek out a highly familiar background in which to function, so that all novelty, or virtually all novelty, is eliminated. By cutting down radically the scale of his whole field of operations, nothing comes along to challenge his feelings of efficacy or control. Maybe he settles into a small town, maybe he goes into his uncle's hardware business, and by this means, you see, he's able to protect his sense of control by never venturing out into a wider world where it could be challenged. But the point I'm trying to hit at here is that our behavior, in a very deep sense, represents different solutions which we have elected in order to avoid feelings of helplessness or impotence on the one hand, and or to attain or to protect or preserve a sense of efficacy and control on the other hand. And for some time I have been testing this hypothesis in my therapeutic work and have found nothing but the most, even to me, somewhat amazing confirmations with the most diverse symptoms imaginable. And I find this an immensely illuminating way to look at the whole field of neurotic symptoms. Let me point out in conclusion the following, just to give this a wider biological foundation, if you wish. Remember that the goal-seeking character of living processes is one of its most distinctive characteristics. I talk about that in the Psychology of Self-Esteem. If we want to understand biological processes, what makes them intelligible, ultimately, what integrates the various actions which organisms perform internally or externally, is the survival requirements of those organisms. It's in the nature, I believe, of living organisms, of biological functioning, that it tends to be goal-seeking. Not in the sense of conscious purposes, but in the sense that, of course, in the case of animals and men, at a certain point conscious purposes enter. But I mean even on the level where consciousness isn't even yet evident. Now, I am applying this principle to the whole area of neurotic symptomatology.